So most people who looked at the Jets draft liked the players that they drafted and looked at that and said, good draft. There are analytics people out there that did not like their process because they traded up multiple times, traded up to get Jermaine Johnson in the first round, traded up to get running back Breece Hall in the second. I understand both viewpoints. I want your initial thoughts, and I'll tell you where I stand as far as the Jets go.
Okay, well, the Jets didn't have a bad draft based on the first round alone. If they had set fire to every one of their draft picks and just gone home, left the building, and not drafted again, they would still have a reasonable grade because they came away with 3 players, each of whom, A, will make an impact for them, B, was one of the top players on their board, and C, I saw all 3 of those guys at one point mocked to the Jets at number 4 overall. They got all 3 of them in the first round.
Yep.
So that, on its own, is immediately good. They got what was probably the number 1 corner and wide receiver on their board, and then an edge rusher that they reportedly loved and were proven to love. So I think that's fantastic. The fact that they had to trade into the first round again to get Jermaine Johnson, who cares? I think that's fine. It wasn't a massive, blockbusting move. It was a move that moved them up, and they got him. I think that's absolutely. They had one of the best first rounds of the entire draft.
Yeah, I think it was fantastic.
Yeah. Then the question is just how much do you want to ding them for drafting Breece Hall in the top of the second? And I don't hate it that much. I really don't. I don't think the Jets roster is terrible. And I think at that spot, they drafted a guy that legitimately comes in, immediate starter, and upgrades massively a certain position. And look, so right now, everybody is focusing on all these Shanahan teams, who are, by the way, all doing the same thing, right? They're all drafting running backs high. And everyone is saying the same thing. Well, the Shanahans of all people should understand that you do not need to go hunting for a high-round running back because look at what happens. It's the undrafted free agent that tears. Well, okay, true, right? That is a fact that right now there is a trend of those offenses, the lower, the guy that costs less resources to attain is outperforming the guy with bigger resources. But the fact that every one of those offenses for a while now has been going after running backs pretty high should at least cause you to ask the question, what am I missing? Right? Fair?
They have a type. I think they have a type. They target that type. Doesn't mean that the highest round ones always work out.
And I'm not saying...
like Elijah Mitchell in the 5th round last year for the Niners was a type that they targeted. They got him later. But clearly, you got to have the one-cut downhill guy.
And I'm not saying they're right to be doing this. But again, the fact that it's happening all the time should at least cause you to question, what am I not seeing, right? Why is every one of these teams going after a running back in the 2nd round or higher when they shouldn't be based off the information that we have? I honestly think a big part of it is size and durability. They want the Elijah Mitchell, but they want him in a tank body, right? And you tend to get that in the 1st or 2nd round because everyone else is looking for one of those guys as well, right? So Breece Hall, 5'11", 217 pounds, and then ran really well at the combine. He has the sort of size and athletic package that you want to put that style of running back into. So for the Jets to go after him, okay, you can argue the value, you can argue the opportunity cost, and maybe they could have gone for another wide receiver or whatever it is. I honestly don't hate bringing Breece Hall in at that spot. And if that's the one problem you have with this draft, then they had a really good draft.
Yeah, there probably are. I mean, look, I think the Jets roster is in a weird spot because you said it's not that bad, right? And I agree. When you look at the roster and you look at the depth chart, and it's like, wow, they've got 2 starting tight ends and they just drafted one. The offensive line's way better than it was, and the defensive line is far better. Everything's far better than it was 2 years ago. Yeah. Let's just say that. And 2 years ago, you would say the offensive line, you're starting from scratch. The secondary, you're starting from scratch. And now it's looking pretty good. This reminds me a little bit of the Jaguars a couple years ago. Remember, they kept drafting high, and it got to the point when you looked at the depth chart, it's like, there's really no holes here. I don't know that they're going to be great, but there's really no holes here. The question's going to be the quarterback, right? If you drop a great quarterback on this roster, they're really good. If you have a Blake Bortles, it's going to be hit or miss. So Zach Wilson's still the biggest question mark, right? If he's good, they're good. If he's not good, it doesn't matter what the roster looks like. They're not going to be that good. But I think you could honestly look at this roster and say, if Breece Hall's the 4th player that you're bringing in this particular draft, which he was, even in the 2nd round,
yes,
and is a speed home run threat, in the Shanahan system where you trust that you've got the offensive line that's good enough, you're going to block it up, and you're going to create these opportunities in space, I understand it, right? You have a home run hitter now at running back to go with all of the playmakers that you've added, including Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing, right? If you want to argue the opportunity cost, what you're essentially arguing is that they should double dip somewhere, right? You don't know that you fix wide receiver by drafting Garrett Wilson, so grab George Pickens as well. You don't know that you fix edge rusher by Jermaine Johnson, so grab whoever was still around, Arnold Ebiketie or whoever was still there at the top of the second. You don't know that you fixed any cornerback by grabbing Sauce Gardner, so grab another quarterback, right? Fine, you could do that, and if they had done that, I wouldn't argue. We've talked before about how double dipping is not a bad strategy.
Ebiketie would have made this thing sweet.
Of course, yeah. But I don't think that you can see why they didn't. You know what I mean? Like, we've already done this. We have a player to fit this roster. If they both pan out, we're overburdened with players at that position. Because remember, Carl Lawson is supposed to be coming back. That's a big money signing in free agency that they're expecting to have this year. Even if you would look at it and say, well, pretty major injury, I don't know if you can bank on him being the same guy. They're going to. They paid him a ton of money. John Franklin Myers is a really good defensive lineman. They've got some players if Jermaine Johnson is the guy they think he is. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to expect them to assume that one of the picks they just made is going to suck. And therefore, they shouldn't draft the running back.
Here's what I loved about the Jets draft. There were some mocks, and maybe my expectations are going against the mock drafts that I hated. There were some mock drafts that had them taking, say, Ike Ekwonu at 4, and then Jermaine Johnson at 10. And as much as we preach perimeter, win on the perimeter, receivers and corners, and build back to front and all that stuff, and we've got a lot of pushback from Jets fans. They will never take a corner over an edge. They believe in pass rushers. That's how they're going to build. I bought into it. You're right. Maybe they're not going to take corners. Maybe I shied away from taking Derek Stingley in certain mock drafts because Jets fans assured me they were taking an edge defender because they loved Jermaine Johnson. I just love the fact that they came away with a cornerback who easily could be the best corner in this draft, and the receiver that you and I had number 1 at receiver, but literally the top players on their board. I listened to Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. I listened to their press conferences too, and they said, we trusted our board.
Yeah.
They literally said we trusted our board. And I didn't go back and re-listen, but I think they said that they had Jermaine Johnson in their top 8. And I think that's why they made the move. I think they said we had 3 top 8 players.
They said he was absolutely in the running at number 10 overall if the board hadn't fallen in the way that it fell, where they got Sauce and then Garrett Wilson.
But they trusted the board, which means they had Sauce Gardner that high, right?
Yeah.
And to take him at 4,
they were saying
he was their second or third best player in the draft.
There was a report, I forget whether it was Burt Breer or Peter King. It was one of those, MMQB / the artist formerly known as MMQB articles that essentially said as soon as they made the Garrett Wilson pick, Joe Douglas nudged Robert Saleh or the other way around, and they were like, if Jermaine starts to slide, let's go get him.
Douglas said at about 16, they started thinking.
Well, that's when they started making the calls. But he said
literally
when they made the pick.
Oh, right when they made the pick at 10.
He nudged him. Was like, if he starts to slide, let's go get him. So that's how they approach this.
So I think the Jets, when you look at their overall team building strategy, there are similarities to what the Bills did. Okay, that we loved that they did with Josh Allen, which was get the offensive line to a reasonable spot, start adding some pieces at receiver. The Bills already had a really good defense, but from an offensive standpoint, they got the offensive line in a good spot. Jets are much better on the offensive line.
Yeah.
I think everything they've done from a team building standpoint, though, has essentially they still had questions at receiver, questions in the secondary especially. They waited on the secondary. So I love that they came away with Sauce Gardner, and I love that they came away with Garrett Wilson. And then at that point, when you have a guy that you did consider at 10, right or wrong, getting him at 26 and trading up to get him, I think they're thrilled.
And look, there's a couple of other things that fall in their favor as well. You look lower down the draft, they bring in a guy like Max Mitchell, who is an offensive lineman who had insanely good grades and is working from sort of physical limitations, right?
A great scheme fit who could legitimately play right tackle.
Great scheme fit and a great gamble to take in the 4th round, right? A guy with proven quality play under his belt, and you just don't know yet if that's going to work at the next level. But a perfect kind of roll of the dice in the 4th round. And then another thing that's kind of with the analytics bent is They didn't pick after the 4th round, right? So the picks they got rid of were the ones that the data would say are the most inconsequential, right? The strike rate in 5th, 6th, 7th round is terrible. So they use those to maneuver for the picks that are going to make the biggest difference to this team. And really the only thing you can quibble with is the Breece Hall thing, which I think is fine. Like, okay, I understand an opportunity cost argument. I don't think it's so much that you criticize everything else they did. And I also think they deserve credit. Again, I use this phrase all the time the last show. Give them credit for making the layup, right? Yes, the board fell in a way that was advantageous to the Jets, but they still could have screwed it up, right? It would have been easy to take somebody ridiculous at those picks, and they didn't. They got players that should fit and work. Let's roll with that.